Christ's Letters, continuation of letter 2, day 13 of my reading and recording the Christ's letters. After I had spoken, the people were quiet for a moment, and then there was a clamor of excited talk, but Zedekiah stood up and said it was time for the household to settle down. His boy needed sleep, and his wife and daughters too were weary after all their weeping. It was arranged that the next morning I should go down to the harbor and sick people would be brought to me. Thus I was able to launch my mission, and everything was speedily arranged for me in the best possible way. It seemed that if I did not heal, there would be no interest in and no acceptance of all I had to tell them. Healing demonstrated the truth of what I wanted to teach, and my teachings would explain the reasons why I was able to bring them healing from the Father. When I woke the next morning, I felt joyously alive with the expectation of wondrous things to come. After I had broken my fast, I set out with Zedekiah towards the town harbor, my heart aglow with love for everyone I passed. I greeted them warmly, telling them I had good news for those who wanted to hear it. When I reached the jetty, I found men, women, and children seated on the ground awaiting my arrival. Some held out their hands to me imploringly. They looked very ill, some were crippled, many were covered in sores. My heart still ached for their pitiful state, but now I could also rejoice because I knew that it was not the Father's will they should be like this. Quite the contrary. The Father was itself all healing, all health, all fitness. I had proved this the night before and in my home. I exulted that I would be able to demonstrate this wonderful truth to the crowds now gathering around me. One sad old face caught my attention. She was wrinkled and thin and crooked. I went to her and kneeling beside her, I placed my hands on her head and immediately felt the flow of Father power through my hands, vibrating through her head until her whole body shook with the life force energizing her limbs. People watching this were astonished and wondered what I might be doing to her, but others quietened their objections. Gradually, her limbs began to unbend, lengthen, straighten. Her face became alive with the joy of returning strength. I helped her to stand up. Then she stood proudly by herself. She was so overcome with happiness. She began to weep, then laughed and danced, calling out to the people. "Praise God," she said. "Praise God," and others standing there took up the refrain. They were all deeply moved by what they had seen. The crush of people pressing in against my person was so great, Zedekiah offered to control them. In orderly fashion, assisted by other eager onlookers, he marshaled the sick towards me, that I might attend to them according to their deepest need. At last, feeling tired, my host invited me back to his house to dine. He sent away those whom I had not been able to heal for lack of time. He assured them I would return the following day. It was a festive evening, so much to talk about, so much to celebrate, so much to teach, so much to learn. All of it certainly good news. The people agreed. I knew that by many I was accepted as speaking truly of what I had seen in the desert. And so it continued for many days. People came to see me from far and wide. Zedekiah and other of his friends helped me to control the crowds to enable me to heal and teach. The people listened gladly. They were talking amongst themselves about the Father and were eager to learn more about the thongs and chains which bound people in misery. The crush became so great, I soon realized I would have to find my own helpers on whom I could rely to assist me. It was time for Zedekiah to return to conduct his leather business, which he had been neglecting. Number 4. Choosing my disciples. I went away to the hills to pray about choosing disciples. When the conviction came to me that I would be guided as to whom to choose, I returned to Capernaum. I felt a strong inclination to go down to the waterfront to speak to some men I had seen listening intently to my teachings. Whether they would leave their fishing nets to join me remained to be seen. But when I called them, Simon, Andrew, James, and John, they came immediately, happy to help in my work of healing and teaching. Others also joined me as I began my work amongst the people. I left my host, Zedekiah's house, with his warm assurances I could return at any time. Thus it was that Thus it was that I commenced my mission as a teacher and healer, wandering wherever needed through towns and villages. Before setting out, I gathered together the young men who had consented and were eager to help me. They would be listening to my teachings and would be mystified by much that I wanted to say. It was vital I should first explain the background to all that had been revealed to me in the desert. I told them that despite my previously lazy way of life, I had always had a profound compassion for people. It was my compassion that made me turn from the God taught by the rabbis. When I spoke of my total rejection of a punishing Jehovah, I could see the doubt and shock in their faces. At considerable length, I explained that I questioned how it was possible to speak of a good God when there was so much suffering endured by innocent children. As I spoke, I saw their faces gradually relax. I continued to voice my previous doubts and anger until I saw their expressions change into those of acceptance and then full agreement. I discovered I had put to them their own doubts and questions which, previously, they had never had the courage to put into words. As we spoke together, I could sense their relief that they were no longer alone in their secret resistance to the rabbi's teachings. I told them there came a time when I began to realize ever more clearly that I was wasting my life. I wanted to change and felt very strongly I should go to John the Baptist as a starting point, as it were, to the commencement of a new way of living. I described what happened during the baptism and my 6 weeks in the desert. I explained that all my previous thoughts and beliefs, attitudes, arrogance, rebelliousness were gradually cleansed from my consciousness whilst I was going through the deep revelations and visions showing me the reality I now called the Father. I explained the nature of the Father and that this divine nature also constituted the divine will. I told them that it was man himself who, through wrong thinking and wrong behavior, shut himself off from the Father within him, and man alone, by first repenting and then by mental, emotional cleansing, could find his own way back to full contact with the Father. When this was accomplished, the full nature of the Father would be released into the person's mind, heart, body, soul, and his life environment and experiences. As this happened, such a person would enter into the kingdom of heaven ruled by the Father, and also the kingdom of heaven would be established within the consciousness of the person. He would then have attained the purpose behind his existence. As I spoke to my disciples, I saw their reactions reflected in their faces. All doubt had gone. There was now a light of dawning comprehension and joy. These young men became enthusiastic believers and exclaimed, "This is indeed good news." However, after their first acceptance of all I said, There were times when they wondered whether all I said could be true. I understood this. To be prepared to rid themselves of the image of Jehovah so deeply imprinted in their minds took a great deal of courage. There were times when they spoke amongst themselves and questioned who was this man claiming such marvels. Supposing they came along with me and it turned out that I was really a messenger from Satan, what then? They would be severely punished by Jehovah. They had much to lose: their standing in society as sober, hard-working young men, their reputation as tradesmen and artisans, their loss of income, and biggest obstacle of all, the probable anger and rejection of their families. What would they receive in return? I told them I could not promise them any earthly reward for their help in spreading the gospel of good news. I had no doubt at all that wherever we went, we would be given food and shelter and would be well received by the people. I could only promise them the truth that the Father knew their needs and would fulfill them and keep them healthy. I could also promise them that as they turned to the Father and trusted the Father every step of the way, they would be happy in a way they had never been happy before. They would experience the kingdom of heaven themselves to the extent they set aside the demands of self and served other people. They would witness the healings, and this would increase their faith and give them the courage to endure any discomforts of the journey. And this was how we came to start on our mission of spreading the good news of the gospel of the kingdom. I sent these young men ahead of me into the town we were to visit. As they entered it, they told the people to gather together to hear the good news of the kingdom of heaven. The people were astonished and wanted to know more, but the disciples urged them to fetch their friends and neighbors, and they would be told all about it when Jesus arrived. And there would be healing of their sick people. Excitedly, many ran to help spread the good news, and soon they were gathered together in a huge crowd. I, who had so deeply and passionately rebelled against the long-faced religious homilies threatening violence, punishments, and damnation to sinners, now walked with joy to meet these crowds. I had my good news to share with them to brighten their day, and healing of ailments and afflictions to gladden their lives. Number 5. My state of consciousness after illumination in the desert. Whereas before I moved amongst people selfishly and empty-handed, taking their goodwill and sometimes their handouts with little gratitude, I came now with an abundance of life-giving possibilities for everyone who was prepared to listen to my words and take action to improve his quality of life. I want you who are reading these pages to fully understand my position at that time, my state of consciousness after illumination in the desert, and the persona I presented to my countrymen as Jesus. There have been so many conjectures that I am about to give you the truth. I was born to have, when mature, a fine physique, strong aquiline features, a remarkable intellect, and a love of mimicry and laughter. But, like so many of you today, I took no care of my earthly talents. At the time of going into the desert, my face and manners were what you might call downgraded from what they should have been. Whilst I had begun to examine and rebel against what I had become, my intellect had also suffered from misuse, constantly engaged in arguments and dissensions over religion and indulging in flippant speech. I made people laugh. I was liked by the men and women I mixed with, but certainly not respected. Hence, the astonishment of those who had known me when I spoke to them in the synagogue in Nazareth. This ends my reading. See you tomorrow. And thank you. Bye.